A once beloved prince, stripped of his titles, his dignity shattered, facing the very real possibility of prison bars closing behind him. But here's where it gets even more shocking. His arrest might not just destroy his own legacy, it could bring down an entire monarchy. We're talking about the end of King Charles's reign, the collapse of a 1,000-year-old institution, all because of one man's devastating secrets. What you're about to discover will change everything you thought you knew about the British royal family. Stay with me, because the rabbit hole goes deeper than anyone imagined, and the consequences? They're already unfolding right now. The story that's currently sending shockwaves through Buckingham Palace isn't just another royal scandal. This is different. This is existential. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, the man who was once Prince Andrew, Duke of York, beloved son of Queen Elizabeth II, has been arrested. Not for a minor indiscretion, not for a PR embarrassment, but on suspicion of misconduct in public office, a charge so serious it carries a maximum sentence of life imprisonment. Let that sink in for a moment. A member of the British royal family, someone born into unimaginable privilege, someone who once held the third position in line to the throne, could potentially spend the rest of his life behind bars. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming. His downfall might not be the end of the story. It might just be the beginning of something far more catastrophic for the monarchy itself. British historian Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, who spent years researching the royal family for his unauthorized biography titled Entitled, has made a statement that should terrify everyone at Buckingham Palace. He claims this scandal has the potential to end King Charles's reign. Not weaken it, not damage it, but actually end it. Mountbatten-Windsor goes even further, stating that this crisis is far more serious than the abdication crisis of 1936, when King Edward VIII chose to abandon the throne to marry American divorcee Wallis Simpson. That moment nearly destroyed the monarchy. It forced Edward's brother, George VI, to assume a role he never wanted, and it sent shockwaves through the British establishment that took decades to settle. Now, 90 years later, we're facing something potentially worse. Because this isn't about love or marriage or personal choice. This is about alleged criminal conduct, about potential cover-ups, about questions of what King Charles knew and when he knew it. The timeline of Andrew's descent is both fascinating and horrifying. For decades, he lived a charmed life. Born in 1960, he was Queen Elizabeth's third child and second son, arriving at a time when the Queen had already established herself as a confident monarch. Unlike his older siblings Charles and Anne, who had a more distant relationship with their mother during her early years as queen, Andrew benefited from her experience and maturity. She had more time for him, more patience, more indulgence. According to royal biographers, this created a particular bond between them, a soft spot that never hardened even when it should have. Andrew grew up with an abundance of confidence, some might say arrogance, that came from rarely hearing the word no. There are stories, confirmed by multiple sources, that even as an adult living at Buckingham Palace, he kept dozens of stuffed animals meticulously arranged on his bed, and woe betide any staff member who disturbed their precise placement. This wasn't quirky eccentricity. This was a man who believed his preferences, no matter how childish, deserved to be respected and accommodated by everyone around him. After serving in the Royal Navy for over 2 decades, including combat duty during the Falklands War, Andrew sought a new role that might elevate him beyond being merely a royal spare. He wanted significance, importance, a legacy beyond cutting ribbons and attending charity galas. Queen Elizabeth supported his appointment as the United Kingdom's trade envoy, a position he held from 2001 to 2011. This was despite concerns from Prince Charles, who reportedly questioned whether Andrew had the temperament and judgment for such a sensitive diplomatic role. Charles's instincts, it turns out, were absolutely correct. Because it was during these years as trade envoy that Andrew allegedly committed the acts that led to his arrest in February 2026. Emails that have recently surfaced suggest he shared confidential information with controversial businessman David Rowland, using his official position to promote private financial ventures. But even more damningly, these documents reveal that King Charles, while still Prince of Wales, was warned about Andrew's inappropriate associations and potentially compromising behavior. He was warned, and according to Loney and other historians, he appears to have done nothing about it. This is where the crisis transforms from being about Andrew to being about Charles himself. If the king knew his brother was abusing his position as trade envoy, if he was warned about Andrew's associations with problematic figures, if he had access to evidence of misconduct and chose to look the other way, then his own position becomes untenable. The British monarchy derives its legitimacy not from divine right anymore, but from public trust and constitutional propriety. A monarch who protects a corrupt family member, who allows misconduct to continue unchecked because of blood ties, violates the fundamental bargain between the crown and the people. Loney has been explicit about this danger, stating bluntly that if the royal family knew about Andrew's behavior and didn't deal with him, then the crisis isn't just about Andrew, it's about the king himself. What the public now demands, according to multiple polls and commentators, is complete honesty about what Charles knew, when he knew it, and what he did or didn't do about it. But let's rewind for a moment and talk about how we got here, because the Andrew story is really several scandals layered on top of each other, each one worse than the last. The first major red flag appeared in 2011 when photographs surfaced showing Andrew strolling through Central Park with Jeffrey Epstein. This wasn't just any walk in the park with an acquaintance. This was 2 years after Epstein had been convicted of soliciting prostitution from a minor and required to register as a sex offender. The images were damning. They showed Andrew, a senior member of the British royal family, maintaining a close friendship with a known criminal, someone whose crimes involved the exploitation of young women. The palace's response was inadequate, merely stating that the Duke of York had misjudged the situation and regretted the meeting. But there was no serious consequence, no stripping of duties, no forced reflection or rehabilitation. Just a mild expression of regret and business as usual. Then came the allegations from Virginia Giuffre, one of Epstein's trafficking victims, who publicly accused Andrew of having sex with her on 3 separate occasions when she was 17 years old. She described being trafficked to the prince by Epstein and his accomplice Ghislaine Maxwell, forced to engage in sexual acts with powerful men as part of Epstein's horrifying network of abuse. A photograph emerged showing Andrew with his arm around Giuffre's bare midriff, her young face smiling at the camera while Ghislaine Maxwell stands in the background. This image became one of the most infamous photographs in modern royal history, visual proof that Andrew had, at minimum, met Giuffre exactly as she claimed. Andrew would later suggest the photograph might have been manipulated, a desperate attempt to cast doubt that convinced absolutely nobody and only made him look more guilty and more ridiculous. For years, the allegations simmered in the background. Giuffre pursued her case through American courts, but Andrew remained protected by his royal status and the physical distance of the Atlantic Ocean. Queen Elizabeth continued to stand by her son, allowing him to maintain his position, his titles, his public role. Then came November 19, 2019, the date that would mark the beginning of the end for Prince Andrew. He sat down for an interview with BBC Newsnight, convinced he could explain everything, clear his name, and put the whole sordid mess behind him. Instead, he delivered what has been described as the worst public relations disaster in modern royal history, possibly in any royal history ever documented. The interview was catastrophic from the first moment to the last. Andrew denied remembering meeting Giuffre despite the photograph. He claimed he couldn't have been sweating with her at a nightclub, as she had described, because he had a medical condition at the time that prevented him from perspiring, a condition supposedly caused by an overdose of adrenaline during his service in the Falklands War. He said he was at Pizza Express in Woking with his daughter on the night in question, a detail so specific and bizarre that it became instant meme material. He showed no empathy for Epstein's victims, no real remorse for his association with a sex offender, no understanding of why any of this might be considered problematic. Instead, he came across as entitled, callous, and completely detached from reality. The public reaction was swift and brutal. Within days, corporate sponsors began severing ties with Andrew's charitable endeavors. Universities distanced themselves from him. The backlash was so intense that even Queen Elizabeth, his most loyal defender, could no longer protect him. 4 days after the interview aired, Buckingham Palace announced that Andrew would be stepping back from public duties for the foreseeable future. But even this was done with kid gloves. He wasn't stripped of his titles. He wasn't forced out of Royal Lodge, the 30-room mansion on the Windsor estate where he lived. He simply stopped attending official engagements while continuing to enjoy all the privileges of royal life. 2 days after the announcement, photographers captured Andrew riding horseback with his mother at Windsor, a visual signal that despite everything, he still had her support. Tina Brown, in her book The Palace Papers, writes about how Charles and William believed Andrew was finished, that he could never return to public life. But Queen Elizabeth and Andrew himself harbored hopes that with time, the scandal would fade and he might resume some diminished version of his former role. Those hopes were demolished in 2022 when Virginia Giuffre filed a civil lawsuit against Andrew in New York, alleging sexual assault. The case put enormous pressure on the royal family, threatening to expose Andrew to American legal discovery processes that could reveal devastating details. Rather than fight the case and risk those revelations, Andrew settled the lawsuit for a sum reported to be around £12 million. He admitted no liability, no wrongdoing, but he paid millions to make the case go away. The source of those funds has never been publicly confirmed, raising uncomfortable questions about whether the Queen or other royals helped finance the settlement. For many observers, the settlement was an admission of guilt regardless of the legal language. Innocent people don't pay millions of pounds to accusers they've never met. Queen Elizabeth died in September 2022, taking with her the last real shield protecting Andrew from consequences. King Charles III, who succeeded his mother, had a completely different approach to the Andrew problem. Where Elizabeth had been protective, maternal, and willing to overlook or minimize her son's failures, Charles was cold, pragmatic, and increasingly ruthless. The differences between Elizabeth's generation and Charles's generation reflect broader shifts in public expectations and royal accountability. Elizabeth came of age in an era when the monarchy's mystique relied partly on distance and discretion, when scandals were hushed up and family loyalty trumped public scrutiny. Charles, despite being 77 years old, understands that the modern monarchy survives only through transparency and adherence to standards that apply to everyone, even princes. The contrast was stark. In March 2022, just months before Elizabeth's death, Andrew had been permitted to play a prominent role at Prince Philip's memorial service, escorting the Queen down the aisle at Westminster Abbey. This was shortly after settling the lawsuit with Giuffre, yet there he was, front and center at a major royal occasion. Fast forward to Elizabeth's funeral later that year, and Charles had already begun imposing boundaries. Andrew attended, but Charles forbade him from wearing his military uniform, a symbolic stripping of honor that sent a clear message. At Charles's coronation in May 2023, Andrew was relegated to the third row of Westminster Abbey, physically marginalized in a ceremony designed to showcase royal hierarchy and importance. Then, in October 2025, Charles took the most dramatic step yet. He stripped Andrew of the last vestiges of royal identity, removing the titles of Prince and Duke of York. From that moment forward, Queen Elizabeth's favorite son would be known simply as Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, a private citizen, not a royal. But Charles didn't stop at symbolic gestures. He also forced Andrew out of Royal Lodge, the sprawling mansion that had been his home for decades, relocating him to a much smaller 5-bedroom property at Sandringham. For a man who had grown accustomed to being surrounded by staff who arranged his stuffed animals and catered to his every whim, this downsizing represented not just a loss of space, but a profound loss of status. Some reports suggested Andrew fought bitterly against the eviction, trying to negotiate financial compensation or alternative arrangements. Charles refused. The message was clear. There would be no more special treatment, no more protection, no more tolerance for scandal. Andrew was on his own. Then came the revelations that changed everything. In late January 2026, new documents from the Epstein files were released, containing emails that appeared to show Andrew sharing confidential information from his official trips to China, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Vietnam while serving as trade envoy. These weren't just casual indiscretions. If the allegations are proven, They represent serious misconduct in public office, potentially criminal violations of his duties as a representative of the British government. The emails also reportedly show connections between Andrew and controversial businessmen, suggesting he was using his official position to advance private interests. On February 19, 2026, Andrew's 66th birthday, police officers arrived to arrest him on suspicion of misconduct in public office. He was held for more than 10 hours before being released without charges, though he remains under investigation. The symbolism of arresting a former prince on his birthday was not lost on observers. It was a stark reminder that no amount of privilege, no family connection, no historical status can place someone above the law. King Charles's response to the arrest was swift and unprecedented. Most royal statements are written in an anodyne third-person voice, carefully crafted to maintain distance and neutrality. But Charles's statement began with a first-person declaration that broke royal protocol in the most deliberate way. He wrote that he had learned with the deepest concern the news about Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and suspicion of misconduct in public office, and that the authorities would have the full and wholehearted support and cooperation of the royal family. He concluded with a line that will echo through history. Let me state clearly, the law must take its course. This was not the statement of a protective older brother. This was the statement of a king drawing a line between the institution of monarchy and a disgraced family member. Royal commentators immediately recognized the significance. Craig Prescott, a constitutional expert, noted that Charles didn't prevaricate, didn't hedge, didn't leave room for interpretation. The statement was released very quickly, suggesting it had been prepared in anticipation of Andrew's arrest. Prescott also observed that Prince William, the heir to the throne, would likely have gone even further, even earlier. This generational shift is crucial to understanding the monarchy's current crisis. Queen Elizabeth, who died at 96, was shaped by a pre-internet world where royal scandals could be managed through carefully timed statements and loyal press relationships. Charles, at 77, straddles two eras, understanding both the old ways and the new demands for accountability. William, at 42, is a thoroughly modern royal who came of age in a media landscape where nothing stays hidden and public trust must be earned continuously. William has made no secret of his discomfort with his uncle's scandals. At a funeral outside Westminster Cathedral last year, photographers captured a revealing moment between the two men. Andrew appeared eager to engage, smiling and even laughing, trying to maintain some semblance of family normalcy. William kept his face neutral, nodding politely but without warmth, his body language screaming discomfort and disapproval. The clip went viral, analyzed frame by people trying to read the future of the monarchy in William's expression. In recent interviews, William has spoken about how change is on my agenda, change for good, a statement that many interpreted as a promise to further modernize and clean up the royal family once he becomes king. His choice to arrive at public events on an electric scooter, tireless, stopping for a pint at a neighborhood pub, signals a deliberate break from stuffy royal tradition. William and his wife Catherine, the Princess of Wales, broke their silence on the latest Epstein revelations earlier this month, stating they were deeply concerned and that their thoughts remain with the victims. This was significant because it centered the victims, something Andrew had conspicuously failed to do in his Newsnight interview. Palace officials have indicated that William fully supported his father's hardline approach following Andrew's arrest. There's a sense that William wants the Andrew mess completely resolved before he inherits the throne, that he refuses to begin his reign with this shadow hanging over the family. As Andrew Loney put it bluntly, they need to clean the stables before William takes on the role. He doesn't want to inherit this. So, where does this leave us? Andrew remains under investigation, his future deeply uncertain. Legal experts suggest that if he's charged and convicted of misconduct in public office, he could face 2 to 3 years in prison, possibly more depending on the specifics of the case. The prosecution would need to prove 4 elements: that he held a public office, that he willfully neglected or abused his position, that his neglect or abuse was serious enough to amount to an abuse of public trust, and that there's no valid defense for his actions. Jonathan Rogers, a criminal justice expert at Cambridge University, believes that if prosecutors can prove the first three elements, which seems likely based on the evidence already public, then Andrew would have no viable defense. The prospect of a former prince in prison is almost unthinkable, yet it's becoming increasingly plausible. But the real crisis, the one that keeps palace advisors awake at night, isn't about Andrew's personal fate. It's about what his downfall reveals about the monarchy itself. The institution that British people have been taught to revere as a symbol of continuity, duty, and moral authority has been exposed as fundamentally dysfunctional, capable of protecting a deeply problematic member for decades simply because of who his mother was. The question of what King Charles knew about Andrew's misconduct, and when he knew it, hangs over everything. If evidence emerges that Charles was informed of his brother's inappropriate behavior while Andrew was still trade envoy, if it becomes clear that warnings were ignored or suppressed, then Charles's own legitimacy comes into question. This isn't hypothetical scaremongering. Royal historian Andrew Loney has stated explicitly that the BBC put a series of quite sensible questions to King Charles about what he knew regarding Andrew's conduct, and the palace refused to answer. That refusal is damning in itself, suggesting there's something to hide. Public opinion has shifted dramatically against the monarchy in recent years, particularly among younger Britons who see the institution as an expensive anachronism with no place in modern democracy. Support for the monarchy has declined steadily in polls, with Republicans arguing that no family should be guaranteed wealth, status, and constitutional power simply by accident of birth. The Andrews scandal hands ammunition to these critics, proving that royal privilege can shield wrongdoing and that family loyalty often trumps accountability. Each new revelation, each new piece of evidence suggesting the palace knew more than it admitted, further erodes the public trust that the monarchy desperately needs to survive. Juliet Reedon, an ABC royal commentator, described Andrew's arrest as a watershed moment in the history of the monarchy, adding that we are in completely uncharted waters. For a senior royal to be arrested has never happened in modern history. She characterized the situation as incredibly damaging to the royal brand, with the monarchy pedaling hard to try to rebuild trust with the public. But can that trust be rebuilt? When the foundation itself is cracked, when the very people who are supposed to exemplify service and duty have instead demonstrated entitlement and evasion, what's left to believe in? The parallels to the abdication crisis of 1936 are instructive, but also misleading. When Edward VIII chose to abandon the throne for Wallis Simpson, it was shocking and destabilizing, but it was also fundamentally a story about love and duty colliding. The British public could understand, even if they disagreed, the human drama of a man choosing romance over responsibility. There was something almost romantic about it, tragic in the classical sense. The Andrew crisis has no such redemptive qualities. This is about alleged criminal conduct, about powerful men exploiting vulnerable women, about an institution that protected one of its own despite overwhelming evidence of inappropriate behavior. There's no romance here, no tragedy in the noble sense. Just sordid reality and uncomfortable questions about complicity. Some defenders of the monarchy argue that Charles has acted decisively, that stripping Andrew of titles and support demonstrates the institution's ability to self-correct. But others counter that these actions only came after years of pressure, after the evidence became so overwhelming that inaction was no longer tenable. Ailsa Anderson, a former press secretary to Queen Elizabeth, praised the swiftness of Charles's response to the arrest and suggested the late Queen wasn't in possession of the facts that the King has today. But is that really believable? Did Queen Elizabeth, with all the resources of the palace at her disposal, really not know the extent of her son's associations and behavior? Or did she choose not to look too closely, preferring maternal loyalty over uncomfortable truths? This question gets to the heart of what makes the current crisis so dangerous for the monarchy. It's not just about one bad actor, one disgraced prince who made terrible choices. It's about a systemic failure of accountability, about an institution that for decades prioritized protecting its own over doing what was right. Every time the palace issued a carefully worded statement defending Andrew or minimizing his associations, every time he was allowed to continue enjoying royal privileges despite mounting evidence, the monarchy was making a choice. It was choosing family over victims, choosing reputation over justice, choosing silence over truth. The palace now faces an impossible dilemma. If Charles admits that he or others in the royal family had knowledge of Andrew's misconduct years ago, then they face accusations of covering it up, of being complicit in his behavior. But if they continue to insist they knew nothing, despite evidence to the contrary, then they look incompetent at best and dishonest at worst. Either way, the institution suffers catastrophic damage to its credibility. This is the trap that Andrew's scandal has created, and there may be no escape from it. Looking ahead, several scenarios are possible. In the best case for the monarchy, Andrew's investigation leads nowhere, charges are never filed, and the whole thing gradually fades from public consciousness. But this seems increasingly unlikely given the weight of evidence already public. More probably, Andrew will be charged, face trial, and potentially be convicted, becoming the first modern royal to serve prison time. The spectacle of that trial, with all its sordid details aired in open court, would be devastating for the royal family's image. But even worse would be if evidence emerges during legal proceedings that implicates others in the family, that shows a pattern of knowledge and cover-up extending beyond just Andrew's individual misconduct. The absolute worst-case scenario, the one that keeps Charles awake at night and drives William's urgency to clean house, is that the scandal grows to the point where it threatens the monarchy's existence. Britain is not the only country to have abolished or dramatically reformed its monarchy in living memory. Greece, Italy, and several other nations have transitioned from monarchies to republics in the modern era. While British attachment to the crown remains stronger than in many countries, it's not immovable or eternal. If enough evidence emerges suggesting the royal family protected a criminal for decades, if the institution comes to be seen as fundamentally corrupt rather than just flawed, then the Republican movement could gain unstoppable momentum. A referendum on the monarchy, once unthinkable, could become politically viable. This is why historians like Andrew Loney can credibly claim that Andrew's scandal could bring down King Charles's reign and possibly end the monarchy altogether. It's not hyperbole or sensationalism. It's a real assessment of how fragile the institution has become, how dependent it is on public trust that has been steadily eroding. Charles is 77 years old. He waited his entire life to become king, longer than any heir in British history. To have his reign potentially cut short, not by natural causes or personal failings, but by his brother's crimes and the family's complicity in covering them up, would be a tragic irony. But it would also be a fitting symbol of how the monarchy's refusal to modernize and hold itself accountable has created the conditions for its own potential destruction. Prince William represents the monarchy's last, best hope for survival. His public image remains relatively strong, his marriage to Catherine is popular, and his children represent the future in a way that generates genuine public affection. But William is acutely aware that he's running out of time to salvage the institution. The clock is ticking not just on his father's reign, but on public patience with the entire concept of hereditary monarchy. If William becomes king while still dealing with fallout from the Andrew scandal, while still answering questions about what his family knew and when they knew it, his reign will be compromised from the start. This is why palace sources suggest William has been pushing for the most aggressive possible response to Andrew, why he supported stripping his uncle of every privilege and protection, why he's been vocal about change and reform. The next few months will be crucial. If Andrew is charged, the trial would likely occur sometime in late 2026 or early 2027. Every detail that emerges during that process will be scrutinized for implications beyond just Andrew's personal guilt or innocence. Prosecutors will likely examine the full scope of his activities as trade envoy, the communications he had with family members about his associations, the warnings that may have been given and ignored. If emails or documents surface showing that Charles or other royals knew about Andrew's misconduct and chose not to act, the political pressure on the monarchy could become overwhelming. Opposition parties might demand a formal inquiry into royal conduct. The media would have a feeding frenzy that would make the coverage of Andrew's Newsnight interview look tame by comparison. But here's what makes this situation especially dangerous. Unlike previous royal scandals that eventually faded from public memory, This one is different because it connects to larger conversations about power, privilege, and accountability that are happening across society. The Epstein scandal itself represents something much bigger than one criminal's actions. It represents a system where powerful men could exploit vulnerable women for years because they had connections, wealth, and influence that placed them above normal accountability. Andrew's alleged involvement in that system, and the royal family's alleged protection of him despite knowing about it, makes the monarchy complicit in that broader failure of justice. Every victim of Epstein and Maxwell, every person who has suffered from abuse by powerful figures who faced no consequences, sees Andrew's story as symbolic of everything wrong with how elite institutions protect their own. This is why the Andrew crisis resonates in a way that previous royal embarrassments didn't. When Prince Harry and Meghan Markle left the royal family, it was dramatic and generated enormous media coverage, but ultimately it was about family dysfunction and personal choices. When Prince Charles's affair with Camilla Parker Bowles was revealed, it was scandalous and hurt his popularity, but it was fundamentally about a marriage breakdown. These were human dramas that people could relate to on some level, messy, but understandable. Andrew's scandal is different. It's about potential crimes, about associations with a sex trafficking operation, about abuse of power and position. There's nothing relatable or forgivable about it. And the longer the palace appears to have known and done nothing, the more damning it becomes for everyone involved. The tragedy, if we can call it that, is how avoidable all of this was. If Queen Elizabeth had acted decisively when the photographs of Andrew with Epstein first emerged in 2011, if she had stripped him of his positions and forced him into genuine exile, the scandal might have been contained. If Andrew had shown genuine remorse, cooperated fully with investigators, centered the victims in his statements, the public might have eventually forgiven him, or at least moved on. If Charles had pushed harder, earlier, to separate the institution from his brother's toxicity, the monarchy might have emerged with its credibility enhanced rather than shattered. Instead, at every decision point, the royal family chose short-term preservation over long-term integrity, chose protecting one of their own over doing what was right. Those choices have now metastasized into an existential threat. So here we are, in February 2026, watching a crisis that has been decades in the making finally reach its climax. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, once a prince, now just a private citizen under criminal investigation, facing potential prison time and the permanent destruction of his reputation. King Charles III, trying desperately to distance himself and the institution from his brother's scandal while facing uncomfortable questions about his own knowledge and inaction. Prince William, waiting in the wings, knowing that he may inherit a monarchy so damaged by this crisis that it cannot be salvaged. And the British public, increasingly skeptical that any family should enjoy guaranteed wealth and status, watching to see if justice will finally be served or if privilege will protect Andrew one more time. The next chapters of this story will determine not just Andrew's fate, but the future of the British monarchy itself. Will he be charged? Will he be convicted? What evidence will emerge about who knew what and when? Will King Charles's reign survive the revelation of uncomfortable truths? Will William get the clean slate he desperately wants, or will he inherit a poisoned legacy? These are the questions that historians will debate for generations, the turning point where the ancient institution of monarchy either adapted to survive or failed to change and paid the ultimate price. One thing is certain. The Andrews scandal has revealed that the emperor has no clothes, that the mystique and majesty of royalty cannot protect an institution that has lost the trust and respect of the people it supposedly serves. The monarchy's future hangs in the balance, and the betrayal of one disgraced prince may be the weight that finally tips the scales toward collapse. The thousand-year institution might not survive the choices made in the name of protecting one deeply flawed man. And if it falls, historians will look back at this moment, at these choices, at this betrayal, and mark it as the beginning of the end.